The question we have before us today is, why does the Tea Party want the Democrat to control the United States Congress? You say, what are you talking about? Well, if you put up candidates who can't win, then the Democrats will win, and they will maintain control of the Senate and possibly gain more seats in the House. Well, you say up in the 7th District of Virginia, the Republican Party has been rocked by a political earthquake. That district had a man who was the majority leader of the House of Representatives, is in line to become the Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful people in America, and the Tea Party didn't like him, so he lost in a primary.
Well, the odds were stacked heavily against Cantor's opponent, but voters demanded change in Washington, and that's just what they'll get. Gary Lane has more on this shocking development.
Shockwaves over an unexpected upset victory. Everyone expected the second most powerful man in the U.S. House of Representatives to easily win his re-election bid in Virginia's Republican Party primary. After all, Eric Cantor had outspent his opponent more than 20-1. But when all the votes were counted, Tea Party-backed candidate David Bratt came out on top.
The reason we won this campaign, there's just one reason, and that's because dollars do not vote. You do.
I know there's a lot of long faces here tonight, and it's disappointing, sure.
Why did it happen? And how will the Republican Party react?
This was a smackdown. This was voters less than 2 hours from Washington, D.C. saying we don't like the direction the country is headed, and we don't like the Republican leadership's response to it.
In his concession speech Tuesday night, Cantor described himself as a conservative.
And we need to focus our efforts as conservatives, as Republicans, on putting forth our conservative solutions so that they can help solve the problems for so many working middle-class families.
But Virginia voters didn't buy it. Tea Party members and other conservatives viewed Cantor as the ultimate insider, close to Wall Street, an establishment Republican. And Bratt, an economics professor from Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia, capitalized on conservative dissatisfaction with Cantor and ran his race as an anti-establishment candidate.
The basic premise is power belongs to the people, and that's what we're going to do.
While this was a shocking upset, an amazing comeback victory for the Tea Party, what is unclear this time is the impact it may have on the Republican Party and the fall congressional campaigns. Will Republican Party leadership embrace a conservative agenda or a more moderate one in hopes of defeating the Democrats? Two main issues dominated Bratt's winning campaign against Cantor: overspending, the massive budget deficit, and immigration reform. Bratt accused the House Majority Leader of wanting to give citizenship papers to illegal immigrants.
Essentially, Cantor got clobbered by a political novice who had a fraction of his money to spend, and that ought to send a message to the leadership in both parties, but I'm not sure it will.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. Well, joining us now with more is the son of a very famous Russert who did Meet the Press for so many years, Luke Russert, who covers Capitol Hill for NBC News. Luke, it's good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Reverend.
Listen, what do you think the deal is? It's almost if you're Machiavelli, you'd set up a Tea Party to destroy the Republicans. What do you think? What's their game?
Well, I think it was a shocking upset last night in Eric Cantor's home district, and while a lot of folks are making this out to be sort of Tea Party versus establishment, there certainly is an element of that. But I look in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham faced a lot of Tea Party challengers, and he was able to beat them back. Mitch McConnell was able to do that a few weeks ago, and you now see there's a runoff in Mississippi between Thad Crocker and Chris McDaniel, the Tea Party-backed candidate. I think in Cantor's district specifically, it's the age-old thing which often happens if a politician goes to Washington. They become big, they have a national profile, they go around the world, they're always on television. Some people feel that they begin to lose touch with those voters in their district. And Eric Cantor is a fascinating example. He's somebody that outspent his opponent, in this case 15-1. He spent $168,000 on steak dinners for his campaign. His opponent spent $200,000 for his entire campaign. So when you start looking at this, you sort of see, okay, he lost 56-44. There is a lot of folks who are perhaps disenchanted with Eric Cantor, the power of the incumbency in this moment, and also, I would say, did not realize one thing they were doing, Reverend, and you touched on this earlier, which I thought was a smart point. Eric Cantor is in line to be Speaker of the House. The seniority that they voted out last night will have a huge effect on that district in the future, because they go from being represented by number 2 to number 1 eventually in the next few years to someone who could be 432 by the end of the day. I think that point was probably lost on those primary voters, but there is a real wave of anti-incumbency feelings right now, sort of throw all the bums out.
Well, the bums, I mean, you know, if the Republicans get thrown out, the Democrats win. I mean, look at Sharon Angle and some of the other races that they were winnable in this last time around. Now they've lost the majority of the Senate. What do you think? I mean, do you think they're...
Well, I think in the Senate, I think you're right. I think there is an element of not having nominees who could be controversial. Look at Kentucky. Matt Bevin, a Tea Party nominee, he lost to Mitch McConnell. Allison Grimes, a Democrat there, would have had an easier time going against him than she will have against Mitch McConnell. She's now definitely the underdog. In Mississippi, there are a lot of folks that feel, even though it's a very conservative Republican state, if this gentleman, Mr. McDaniel, were somehow able to beat Thad Cochran in a runoff, which is a possibility, that could open up the door to a Democrat representing Mississippi, which would be extraordinary in this day and age. So I certainly agree with you that the outside, more conservative elements of the Republican Party could have a detrimental effect on the general election prospects. In this race specifically, though, for Eric Cantor, although he had his own problems about being out of touch, what does it mean for 2016? Because any Republican congressional candidate or even senatorial candidate who is thinking about becoming more moderate on issues like immigration, perhaps on things like education spending or whatnot, now really has to look at themselves and say, look, do we risk becoming primaried from the right? And is that the direction we want to go? That is where I agree with you. I think that opens up a huge window for someone like Hillary Clinton to walk through and not even have to go so far to the left in her own primary and walk the middle lane all the way to the presidency.
Well, it's like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's just crazy. But take the issue of immigration. The Republicans have got to make nice to the Hispanics. They've got to do it, but they're perceived as anti-Hispanic. What do they want on immigration, and what was the problem that you saw with Eric Cantor and immigration?
It's interesting. I've been covering this issue for a long time on the Hill, and the sticking point always comes down to border security. But when you give them the question, especially House Republicans, what constitutes securing the border, there's never really a clear answer. The Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Folks like John McCain, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Lamar Alexander. That bill contained billions of dollars to not only up the force of Border Patrol agents, there are things like drones, more intense weaponry there on the border to stop the flow of illegal immigrants. So when you ask the question to a lot of House Republicans, they don't give you a straight answer. They say securing the border. Bob Corker, a senator from Tennessee, said probably what was in that Senate bill was overkill. So until that question of what constitutes securing the border for a lot of House Republicans is figured out, I don't think they'll move on immigration reform. And a lot of that happens to be because their districts are not majority Latino. Only a few of them are. I believe it's less than 20 in the House GOP conference. So there's not the impetus to move like there are for those statewide senatorial candidates. But you touch on a very important point. Look at the demographic numbers. The United States is becoming much more Latino as the years go by. A lot of them are reaching the age of 18 and are becoming voters. And if the Republican Party continues to alienate them on this issue, they risk being in second place, at least in the national election, for a long time.
Luke, you're right. They're going to lose, the Republicans lose California. They lose possibly Texas someday down the road. They lose New Mexico.
Texas could be purple, sure.
Yeah, all the way. Anyhow, Luke, you're going to be talking to a very lovely lady in a few minutes about your new book, so I won't take that up. I talked to your father one time about Big Russ, and so you got your book, and we'll let you talk about it. But thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The IRS Tea Party scandal is getting worse. The latest revelation of abuse, the IRS gave the FBI more than 1 million pages of tax documents without a court order. That happened in October of 2010, just before the midterm elections. This revelation comes in a letter to the IRS commissioner from Congressman Darrell Issa and Jim Jordan. The letter indicates the massive data dump included public returns from nonprofit groups and taxpayer information. The law requires the IRS to keep that confidential. The data came from IRS administrators Lois Lerner and Sarah Hall. A California judge ruled against tenure and other job protections for public school teachers in the Golden State. The Los Angeles County Superior Court judge said such laws are unconstitutional and harm children by saddling them with bad teachers. It's a landmark decision that could influence schools across the country. Teachers have long argued that tenure helps preserve academic freedom and prevents administrations from firing on a whim. The California Teachers Association plans to appeal the ruling. Pat?
Well, the tenure thing is a teacher protection racket that was put in place a long, long time ago by an ultra-leftist who decided, how are we going to protect radical teachers from the conservative school boards that will be hiring them? And they came up with this matter of tenure. And it's gotten so bad that it's almost impossible to fire a public school teacher. So it's an extraordinary move by a federal judge to say that tenure discriminates against minorities. I mean, I frankly have never heard that argument advanced in the court before. It's very novel. But I think that decision, I don't applaud a lot of these district court decisions, but I sure applaud that one. John?
Pat, a gunman entered an Oregon high school Tuesday and fatally shot one student. The shooter was found dead a short time later. Authorities did not say whether he took his own life. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office says there were reports of shots fired at 8 o'clock in the morning at Reynolds High School in Troutdale. The school went on lockdown and students were evacuated room by room, police said. A teacher was also wounded in the attack. It is the third shooting on a school or college campus in the last 2 weeks. Christian families are among the tens of thousands of Iraqis fleeing Mosul after Islamic militants violently seized control of the city. The jihadist group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant and has a reputation of violent persecution of Christians. Sunday, the terrorist group set off car bombs in the Iraqi capital, killing 4. Meanwhile, the Iraqi government is struggling to cope as security forces have collapsed.
They abandoned their arms, ammunition, and armored vehicles and their positions, leaving them behind to terrorists. They even left Mosul airport and some planes.
Mosul is a strategic prize for these insurgents who've been advancing in Syria as well as Iraq. Experts believe they hope to set up a military enclave along the border between the two countries. Pat, this is a huge loss for the Iraqi government.
Think what happened, folks. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars against Saddam Hussein. We were going to free that country from dictatorship. We were going to usher in democracy into Iraq. And so we get everything all set up. We have an election. There's a weak leader, but nevertheless he's in there. And so we take a president here in the United States who says, I didn't like that Iraq war ever, and I want to get out as fast as I can. So he does not have a status of forces agreement put in place before we pulled out. So we had no right to come back in there and fight. And we could have had it because we were controlling the thing, but we let it go, we let it slip. So now the second largest city in Iraq has been taken over by al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is now linking up with their other friends over in Syria, and a vast stretch of territory is now under al-Qaeda control. That's what's happening. That's what inattention by the White House does. That's what it happens when you have a community organizer running your foreign policy. It is a dangerous thing. And we're, sooner or later, are going to have to get back in there, or the Middle East is going to devolve into chaos, one or the other. John?
Pat, Nigeria is the most violent country in the world for Christians. The West African nation leads the top 10 violence list produced by the Christian group Open Doors. In a recent 17-month period, the group recorded nearly 2,100 Christian murders in Nigeria and more than 3,600 churches destroyed. The spokesperson says violence against Christians in Nigeria is only getting worse.
We're seeing in 2014 that even more secular and national and international news is covering what's going on, just because it's getting more and more horrific with the kidnapping of these girls and other horrible bombings and attacks against Christian communities.
CBN's Operation Blessing is in northeast Nigeria, bringing aid to school kids facing danger from Boko Haram and other Islamists. The ministry's David Darg was able to visit a boarding school with a heavily armed security detail. The school is located in Mubi, where a Boko Haram suicide bomber killed more than 40 people just last week. The school was closed after Boko Haram captured almost 300 other schoolgirls in the region. It reopened this week, and Operation Blessing is now providing food, computers, and razor wire for extra security. OB will also be helping with bigger projects like a well and improvements to dorm rooms over the next few weeks. And Pat, that's a little bit of good news for a region plagued with so much violence.
Well, CBN's there, ladies and gentlemen. Where there's a need, we try to move in and help people. And but I would call on Goodluck Jonathan, the president of Nigeria, to get his forces together and put down this Boko Haram before it gets any worse. It is spreading. It's like a amoeba. It's just all over the territory. It's a small group, but they are vicious and radical, and they've got to be stopped. And something has to be done. This is just one more place that is exploding in this world. It's like the whole world is in chaos, and this is one place. When there is weakness, those who are supposed to be the police, when the police aren't functioning, then crime runs amok, and that's what's happening. The Boko Haram, small group, but vicious and heavily armed, and they're terrorizing people. But we're there with Operation Blessing to help those people recover some vestige of dignity in their lives.
The Southern Baptist Convention has a new president today. Arkansas megachurch pastor Ronnie Floyd will lead the nation's largest Protestant denomination. The SBC is holding its annual convention in Baltimore this year. Before the meeting, a panel met to discuss religious liberty in the U.S. The topic, Hobby Lobby's fight against the Obama administration's birth control mandate in the health care law. Rick Warren and Religious Liberties leader Russell Moore predicted Hobby Lobby would win their Supreme Court case, but Moore also said, quote, "If we lose this case, the gospel is not lost. If the United States of America crumbles away, the gospel is not lost." The Supreme Court is expected to announce its ruling by the end of the month. The Bergdahl family's former pastor is speaking out about the controversy over Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's release and calling for mercy. Phil Proctor was interim pastor at the Bergdahls Church in Idaho. He's now the pastor of Sterling Presbyterian Church in Northern Virginia, and the Bergdahls stay with him when they visit D.C. Proctor told Christianity Today, "These are brothers and sisters in Christ. We can have political views on whether Bo should be in prison or whether Bob should say the Arabic version of shalom. But to adopt the rhetoric of the day and use it to guide conversations among Christians about another self-professed Christian, I'm saddened by that." Proctor called on Christians to extend grace and leave judgment to the courts. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.